Hey Martin, welcome to the Pawn Pro Pod. For those of you that don't know Martin, he is from Premier Pawn up in Canada. We are so happy to have you on the podcast today.
I'm super excited to be here. Thank you so much. I've been watching the episodes. They've been great. Admittedly, I am one or two behind. I've had a busy couple of weeks, but I think this is an asset to the community. I mean, a chance to learn from some of the best out there. So I've learned a lot from the previous episodes, and hopefully I can give a little bit back. So
Awesome. Well, I'm really happy to have you on. Let's just do a little intro. How'd you get your start in pawn? What inspired you to stay in pawn? Talk to us about your entry into the industry.
my background starts with a firing and an eviction. So I didn't come into pawn through any family or anything like that. I originally mucked around with computers a lot when I was younger, and I got hired by a pawn shop to do some tech support for them, PC setups, things like that. And the store owner came to me one day and he said, "I want to move out of town, open another location. Would you manage this one?" And I said, "Well, I know nothing about pawn." He's like, "Well, you already know our computers and you kind of know our software, so that's already better than anyone I would hire." So I'm like, "It's not wrong," and I needed work, so I said, "Sure." So that was my introduction to the industry. Now, about 6, 7 months later on, he comes to me and he says, "We're established in our new location. We don't need this one anymore. We're going to offer it for sale to the employees. Would you guys be interested?" So I approached my father and I said, "Hey, Dad, what do you think?" And he's like, "Okay." And my dad's always been one of these treasure hunter kind of guys who would go to flea markets and look for the treasure in the table, so to speak, right? So we met up with the owner. We set a closing date. We set a closing price. We shook hands. Went back home, and I was excited. I'm thinking, man, in 2 weeks I'm going to own a pawn shop. Um, and the next morning I woke up and, this is a lot of years ago. I'm going to date myself here. We still had the fax machines with the curly paper, right? So, and there's a fax machine in my home office, and I go in and I pull it out, and it said, "Got better offer, you're fired." And I'm like, oh. So I went from owning a shop to being unemployed. So then, I talked to my dad, and he's like, "Well, we're already set up to do this thing. We've committed to checking it out, so let's give it a crack, right?" So we opened our own store, and our first location was 800 square feet. It was disastrously too small. We didn't know better, and the landlord came to us a couple months in and said, "You know what? We've decided we don't want a pawn shop in the mall," which was one of the best things that could have possibly happened to us because, getting held to that lease for
Yeah.
can't remember how many years it was, would have probably killed us. So, we definitely made some silver linings out of some train wrecks, but out of some gray clouds or whatever. But it was pretty good, yeah.
That's a
So
good
that's my
story.
history.
So that's how you ended up here. That's really, yeah, lots of silver linings. Um, but now you
Yeah,
have
I
your,
mean, you gotta make the lemonade out of the lemons. It obviously didn't unfold like we expected, but it's not like it didn't work out for the best in the long run, right?
what other lemonade have you made out of lemons? What kind of challenges have you experienced since then, and how did you overcome those?
Um, I mean, at least in our town, it's always been a struggle with footprint. The zoning is extremely pawn shop unfriendly, so we've always struggled with floor space. So, I talk to other pawnbrokers in the U.S. and they've got 5, 6, 8, 10,000 square foot stores, and my store is 2,000 square feet.
Mm.
So this forced a lot of evolution. We very much had to look at operating models that could work in small footprint. So we realigned our product lines to maximize our loan yield and maximize the value per foot. We had to work on turning inventory. Obviously, it's been an operating challenge that I think unless you've been forced into a small box, you've never really had to look at. I mean, one of the calculations we run in our stores, we literally look at something and say, I'm going to lend $100 on this lawnmower, and in that space, I could fit 5 PlayStation 4s. Well, which one is going to make me more money? Well, I'm going to put the PlayStation 4s there, right? or fives now, or Series X, or whatever the current iteration of
Right.
things is. But yeah, so I mean, it's always been a struggle of, I have this box to work in. How can I pull the most value out of it, right?
Totally. I think
I
just
know,
right off the
weird
bat,
answer.
for right off the bat, for people that don't know Martin, he's kind of like the guru on data and KPIs. And just in the last minute and a half, you rattled off a handful of data points that I think are really important and that some of the best retailers really pay attention to: profit per square foot and inventory turns. And what would be some of like your top three KPIs that you run to help your store run efficiently?
Wow, I gotta come up with that off the bat. Okay, I need more coffee. I think stock aging is an important one, and I'm going to express it, but I'm certainly not the one who came up with it. I have a friend who actually clued me in on a system he uses where, every 90 days he runs a report. He uses ad hoc and Bravo religiously, by the way. That is a godsend. But we have a custom ad hoc where we run a report. It says, what turned 90 days old today? What turned 180 days old today? What turned 270 days old today? And I tell my team we have to go find it, touch it, lick it, sniff it, pick it up, see what it tastes like, and then figure out what's wrong with it, and then rework that in some ways. So, and we do it, daily, because the theory is, that way it keeps it manageable. If you say, well, show me everything that's 90 days or older, you're going to get pages of paper potentially. But if you're like, what turned 90 today? It might be two items. So you divvy that out to the team and you go find it, right?
Yeah.
Um, that's kind of our peak efficiency model. We do occasionally kind of peel that back a bit to aging by cabinet, where we'll go, okay, this whole cabinet is going to get aged today, and then next week we're going to do another one, and that means we basically rotate the entire store every quarter in terms of reviewing what's out for sale. Ideally, we'd like to do the ad hoc, but it also depends on how crazy busy we are. So, and they
That's a
forget. So.
super awesome one. And I think keeping it really manageable, and that's sort of the point of this whole podcast, is keeping things manageable, which is just run it for a day. Don't run it for a 3 month period or anything over a certain number of days, because then it becomes so overwhelming. You don't actually end up touching everything, and you're like uninspired and feel down about not being able to do it.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, I think this is a key part for employee motivational purposes. It has to seem achievable. When you hand someone a giant sheaf of paper or printouts or PDFs and say, go do this, they're like, oh my God, this will take weeks. If you hand them one page and say, this is everything on it, that's a little bit more attainable for them. And in full disclosure, I didn't come up with the system. I borrowed it from my friend Trevor at Digital World out in Eastern Canada. So props out to you, Trevor. Thank you. But yeah, no, that's been a great system. Let's see what else we do. Uh, we're big, and again, it's a different model for us because of our space constraints. We very much focus on essentially profit per foot
Yeah.
in our store, just because of room issues. So, I mean, I'll sit down and I'll look at a product line and say we did, $10,000 in sales in brass plated flange flippers, but they took up half the store. So that's not worth the space allocation, right? So we go through our categories and we say what is going to give us the best ROI for the space utilization. And we started doing that in our pawn warehouse as well. We don't like turning away transactions, but I also have to go, this giant, our enemy right now, our evil empire, is flat screen TVs. They're so cheap now and they chew up so much room that I'm like, I can put so much more in that spot that would make me so much more. So
I
we're
was gonna
getting
ask
fairly
you about
strict on what we're
TVs.
doing there.
TVs are like such a like my whole childhood I feel like was just staring at all the screens in my dad's pawn shops, and they were like the super deep like tube TVs. And now like I go into pawn shops and I see TVs and I'm like, I don't even know how you're making this work. Like they're flat, but they still take up so much space, and you can buy a TV so cheap. It just seems so competitively difficult for the amount of space that they take up.
Well, this is the problem. They're not worth anything anymore. And as
Right.
as consumer electronics get cheaper in some cases, we have to look at phasing out product lines. And, it is rough. You look at a client, you're like, I know you've got this TV you paid $500 for. I'm going to put it out, for
Yeah.
whatever when I own it, and it's going to take 2 months to sell, and I have to look at how much I'm occupying space wise for that to sit there, right? So, and we're not a high rate shop, so it's one of those things that I have to look at. Going into doing a loan for $50 that chews up 3 or 4 feet, that's a problem, right? So.
So how do you calculate profit per square foot for somebody that's interested in that?
I mean, for us, again, Bravo Ad Hoc is amazing. You can literally sit down and pull out your sales in a category and go, for me, obviously there's the television category. We sit down and say, well, I sold in 1 year X value of TVs, and it created this much return in terms of cash dollars profit, and how much room am I allocating in my showroom for that item?
Mm.
And you can do the same thing in ad hoc for loan dollars. So you can go back, like, we send our team back and we say, take a tape measure, measure out how much space we're allocating to televisions, and then go, okay, what are we going to do for this, right? So it's basically, and what I like about the platform is we can marry the data that we get from Bravo to measurements in the store, and we can literally, have a formula that tells us these product lines are, subpar, phase them out, or find a new way. It's not like we're not doing TVs, but we're being a lot more selective on TVs
Right.
that have to hit a certain value threshold, right?
Right. The other one that I think is super important that you mentioned, I don't know that everybody tracks it, is inventory turns. So maybe you can talk a little bit about inventory turns.
Yeah, and again, I mean, to be transparent, the software calculates it, and pretty much every software package does. But I kind of like that. At least when I do presentations for like Expo and things like that, I am like, you should do this yourself, because you're going to get a grasp of the numbers in a different way if you understand how it works. So, I mean, you have essentially, you take your items sold at cost over a period of time. It's usually a year, and then you take your average inventory in that period and you divide through, essentially, and you go, well, I sold $50,000 worth of product, and I stock $25,000 worth of product on average, so I have an inventory turn of 2, because I've got that, $50,000 at cost sold divided by my average inventory level gives me, inventory of turn of 2. So the theory is you've rotated your inventory at cost twice that year. And it's part of, several operating metrics that you want to keep an eye on. But a key point here is, if you think about it, the faster you're flipping your inventory, the more quickly you're recapitalizing, the less risk you have of, product damage, product loss, obsolescence. One of the things we coach our team is old inventory distracts and detracts. New customers come in and they're like, that guitar's been on the shelf for 6 months. Why is it still here? You know what? Maybe their stuff is overpriced. Maybe my team can't put a new guitar up because that old guitar is there. So, I mean, this goal of getting that stuff gone is important, right?
I like that quote. Will you repeat it? The detracts and distracts.
Well, old inventory distracts. It distracts customers from
Yep.
finding the new inventory, and it detracts from the appearance of your store. I mean, fundamentally, if people are coming in and it's the same thing every day, there's no excitement.
I love
There's
that
also no
mantra.
reason. Yeah, well, there's no reason for them to want to buy, because they're like, "Ah, it'll be here next week." But if they come in
Totally.
and it's different every month, and they see something they like, suddenly they're like, well, maybe I need that thing, because frankly, if I don't buy it today, it probably won't be here next time I come around. So
Yeah.
you actually find that the faster you turn, the
The
more it
more.
wants to turn, right?
Right. Right. That totally makes sense. Any other good pawn shop mantras that you have like that?
Uh,
I know that's
Buy my
a
book?
mantra.
No, I don't know. That's just one of the ones that we use in store. Yeah, no, I don't.
I love that.
If I come up with some, I'll put them up on the Bravo forum. How's
Yeah,
that?
let us
So.
know. I'm like a big business leadership mantra kind of person, so I try to like write them down. I'll have to figure out a different application for distracts and detracts since I don't have physical items, but I like that one. You mentioned before motivating your team and keeping kind of their to-do list short so that things are actionable and achievable. how else are you um, motivating your teams?
Cookies.
Cookies, great.
Um, it's okay. It sounds weird. And it's again, I'm not the person that came up with this. I don't know who I borrowed it from, although we've adapted it. We do bounties in our store. So oldest item sold in a month gets a Starbucks card.
Mm,
Um, we'll do things like, same top loans written, top sales, oldest item sold. We perk reviews. So if they, if their name is mentioned in a review, they get perked. So like there's a lot of it for us. I'm like, arguably yes, this is in their job description, but I watched this cool video on YouTube about something referred to as discretionary effort. That effort that they can choose to give that's above the baseline. So what I want to do is recognize that, you know, you can come in and do your job, or you can do your job with excellence. And what I want to do is reward that discretionary effort that's a little bit above the baseline. So I don't know what it is about a Starbucks coffee card. It is a knife fight in a closet for that coffee card. We used to perk cash. It got nowhere near the response that the coffee card does. I literally think it's caffeine and the right to say I'm top sales for the month. That those two
yeah.
things drive change, right? So
That's really awesome. Maybe if you can, or I can try to find that YouTube, but I think that I want to watch it because similarly, there's doing your job and then there's striving to do it with excellence. It's really hard to make every hire somebody that's going to always strive for excellence. Some people are going to do the job that's required, and so finding ways to recognize. I think recognition is probably the number one reason why people stick around somewhere when they're a really valuable employee, and getting creative in that. And it's not, to your point, it's not something that's like Herculean. Like a Starbucks gift card in the title is enough recognition for somebody to continue to proceed with excellence.
well, I mean, again, I read somewhere that, I mean, some companies were like, you get the VIP parking spot for the month if you're, top
Yeah.
sales, or,
Yeah.
just some way of recognizing that this person's done something that is, above norm, or, at a better level than maybe their peer group would be, right? And,
Yeah.
what you want to encourage is other team members going, well, A, that's attainable because they did it, which
Yeah.
means I can do it. And
Yep.
B, I want to do it because I want that cookie,
Yeah.
right? And we do other things. Like if we have a great day that I think was team driven, I'll buy them all lunch. Um, things like that. But I mean, that I'm sure, pretty much every store does that. We're slamming, let's get pizza, whatever, but they appreciate it, right? So,
I don't think every store does that. I think that that's things that are extra thoughtful and meaningful. I do all of our new hire onboarding, and so we'll onboard between 4 and 10 people, and there's sort of new hire orientation, and I'm the first that gets to go. And I love asking people how they like to be recognized because it's super interesting. Some people are obviously very like monetarily driven, but some people just want to be recognized by like a peer and like behind closed doors. They don't want public recognition. And some people are like, I want employee of the year and I want to post it everywhere. So it's really interesting how different people, and I think if you're interested in that and you kind of not just ask the question, but then you try to show up for your different employees in whatever ways that they like to be recognized. But the feedback that I get is never impossible recognition. It's not like, oh my gosh, you're demanding so much recognition. Like there's just no way. It's like, it's a little bit goes a really long way. It has to be obviously recurring. You can't just recognize somebody once and never again for a job well done, but it's always attainable. And I think that that's the coolest part about recognition is it's never something that's impossible to give people.
I don't think anyone gets up in the morning and says, I'm going to do a bad job.
Yeah.
I think everybody at a foundational level would like to think that they're good at their work, right?
Yeah.
So, um, but over time, people wear down. They had a bad weekend, or they had an off customer, or they're just tired. So that little reminder of, hey, there's this coffee card. You gave them an attainable thing that they can strive towards. Um, and I mean, I'll be honest, I do the same thing. So I'll go do a presentation at one of the conventions, and then I'm nervous and I'm racking my brain through it. And then I come out and somebody's like, wow, that was really good. And I'm like, this made it worthwhile. Like there's that, it's not a
Yeah.
public accolade, but still, if somebody learned a thing,
Yeah. Same
I
thing.
feel it was worth my time investment. Yeah.
That's how I feel about speaking at conventions too. It's like, it's not my favorite. Like I get nervous to do it, even though I'm on webinars and like in front of a screen all day talking to people. But getting up at a convention is really like a stretch for me. But just one person, if one person takes away one thing, all the preparation, all the nerves, all of the like anxiety going into it, I'm like worth it. I would do it again for that one. Just somebody saying, "Hey, I learned one thing."
Well, and it's funny because I get this imposter syndrome here because I will look at the audience in the trade show and I'll be all of these people are smarter than I am, right? So and that guy owns 9 stores, that guy's got this, and sometimes they just walk up and said, I really like how you did this, or and sometimes it's just they won't even agree. They'll just say, yeah, I disagree with you, and here's why. And I'm like, but you listened.
Yeah.
You paid enough attention to listen, and now I have a chance to learn something because maybe I've screwed something up, right? But the
Yeah.
point is you actually listened, so it's been cool, right? So
What are some of the industry trends that you're seeing right now and maybe ways that you're adapting to those new trends?
um I mean, I think across the board in Canada and the US we're going to see loan growth.
Yeah.
um we're also seeing that there's at least in our region a lot of people are selling versus not selling versus pawning, but we've seen an uptick in sales on various items, and I think what's happening is people are looking at this and going, I don't know that I'll be able to get this out. So rather than going into a payment commitment like or not a commitment, but like a pawn, they're like, well, I don't need this anymore. I'm going to let it go. So I think there's an underlying economic indicator that maybe things are getting harder out there. And, the news discusses it. And, at least up here, they're like, well, it's not a recession, it's a pullback. And I'm like, well, I'm pretty sure the people selling their old laptop because they can't pay rent are recessing. Um,
Right.
right. But no,
Tell us
it's,
who you are.
so we've got that. That being said, you just have to pivot. You've got to make room. You've got to help as many people as possible. And, with us, we're tracking inventory very closely. Um, one of the things that caught us flat-footed, which we didn't like, we're very jewelry based. The slide in the diamond market's been painful,
Mm,
so we've
yeah.
had to pull back what we're putting out on those, just because frankly, they're you don't want to drop thousands of dollars into a stone and have it be worth 20% less 6 months later. And jewelry traditionally is not as fast of a turn as hard goods.
Yeah.
So, it depends on what your business model is like. So yeah, there's risk in the jewelry space right now that we're navigating through too, and adapting out of. So yeah, it's been interesting times anyway. So
What's maybe one piece of important advice that you'd give to somebody just starting out in the industry?
um brand new to the industry, and this is going to be hard because it depends on their business acumen.
Yeah.
For me, it would always be pay attention to your cash flow. I've talked to a number of pawnbrokers over the years where they've succeeded themselves into bankruptcy essentially.
Yeah.
They're cash poor but inventory rich. They've bought a bunch of stuff. They've got a bunch of stuff in pawn. They've got a bunch of inventory, but there's no money in the bank to pay bills or pay.
Right.
So you do have to be mindful that you can succeed yourself into death in this industry, right?
Yeah.
So be mindful of what you're buying, be mindful of what you're lending, make sure that, the payments come in and that you're turning that inventory. Cash flow is king.
Yep. Super good advice. One more thing that I wanted to touch on before we jump off is I know you're involved in associations. You come, you speak, you're part of some groups. How did you find those? How did you get involved? For somebody maybe that has never gone to a convention, how did you decide to go to NPA and get involved?
So I've been in the industry now for right around 30 years. When we were originally there, there was no information that was easily publicly accessible. Every
Hmm.
shop was an island. You were left to kind of navigate things on your own. When we found out about the NPA, we joined to get essentially the magazine and learn things. And that was really our industry source now. But over the last couple decades, I've really discovered that, at least, and I'm sure most of the viewership is in the U.S., that, I mean, you really need to be part of your state association or the NPA because it's the only industry stewardship that exists. The politicians are, not necessarily pawn favorable and they're not necessarily pawn educated. So advocacy on a state and national level is very important. Going to a trade show, you've got a chance to trade information with your peers, learn things from industry partners. It's just one of those things that it does help move you to the next level. You know, that being said, there's other ways to do it, but that was the tool we got in 2 years ago, and I don't regret it. It's been excellent, and I've made some lifelong friends, and I've learned a lot. So, I mean, it's just a thing I think you should do.
Awesome. Last question. It's a Bravo specific question.
Yep.
What would you tell somebody that's in the middle of making the transition over to Bravo today? Conversion, implementation, onboarding.
So we onboarded with Bravo in fall of 2020, coming from Pondmaster originally before you guys acquired it. It was a good conversion, but not bulletproof. And one of the things that I did, which I would endorse, would be we got you guys to do a test conversion of our data, and
Mm-hmm.
then we trained on it.
Yep.
So our team actually had our own inventory, our own client records. So when I would sit down and say, okay, you've got 5 hours of time to sit here, watch these Bravo videos, play with the system, they could look up a customer they could knew. They could
Yep.
make a sale transaction using inventory that was actually in store. They could, I mean, technically you could even run parallel, which would probably be the best way to do it, but
Yeah.
wasn't quite that organized. But yeah, for sure, having data to play with, I would, no disrespect to Bravo, I wouldn't say this for any software package. You do not want to hit the ground running with no training on day one with a new software package
Yeah.
because it's not a good client experience, right? So,
Totally. I think that's a really good point. We do staging, training, sandbox conversions for people. The amount of people that actually then go test the data and practice with their own data is like 5% of people. So if you're listening to this and you want your test
yeah,
data, take it and then use it and then train on it because that's where the
yeah,
value is. Yeah.
that is such a missed opportunity
Yeah.
because one, it tests the conversion, although I'm sure it's way better now than when I onboarded because you have access to both sides of the equation. But um, your people know these customers. They know
Yeah.
the transactions they did. When you can do it on one system and then look at another, and if the results were different, you're like, wait, I messed something up, right? So it's
Right.
just a good cross check. So yeah, I think that's an excellent plan.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Pawn Pro Pod. Super honored
Oh, my
to
pleasure. Thank
have you.
you.
Have an awesome rest of your day.
All right, you too.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Martin. Bye.